Swansea. The story of Joe. It's Saturday morning. Some teenage girls are lying on the cold ground of the train station, doing their best to sober up. Some older guys are making fun of them. They talk in a language that I don't understand, but somehow I'm sure it's English. I arrived in Swansea, a city at the coast of Wales. A few weeks ago, I contacted Jo with a question to take me on a tour through her city, the infamous capital of Japanese knotweed. Jo has a company called Knotweed Control, a flourishing business in a city that is literally overgrown with my favorite invasive. She picks me up at the train station and takes me to a community center to get a cheap coffee. "Did you see The Legend with Will Smith?" she asks. "It's a zombie movie. We saw it yesterday. When we came out of the theater, we saw zombies, but then for real. This whole street was filled with people, drunk, trying to get to the next bar to get more drinks. Cold eyes, brain wasted. They swarm over the city. Well, that's how it goes over here every weekend. It's a bit frightening." "Do you like zombies?" I ask her. "Not really. I never thought of it," she mumbles, while she stares at a bar at the opposite side of the road. The bar is called Bamboo. We get into Jo's car that has a bumper sticker saying Knotweed Control, and she takes off immediately. Well, I have to say, it's too late, you know. The knotweed is here to stay. There's no going back anymore. Jo takes a paper and a pencil out of her backpack. This is an invasion curve. It depicts how invasions evolve over time. So this arrow is time, and the other one is the spreading of the plant. How much space it takes, how much territory it conquered. Jo is now driving her car and drawing the invasion curve in the same time. We drive past Marks and Spencer's, where we will have lunch later that day. She will take a sandwich with a traditional Welsh sausage, and she's slightly disappointed when I take a lentil soup. At a certain point, the inversion curve gets to a plateau, and then there's no way back. Now, when you get to this point, the only thing you can do is local control. And that's what we do now here in Swansea. For the knotweed, it went quite quick. Before we knew it, it took over the city. She keeps on drawing lines and arrows while steering. There's a lot of traffic on the road. Swansea plays in the Premier League and there's a game on today. "I'm more into rugby," she says. "Rugby is more like a Welsh thing." Before we got the name, the capital of Japanese knotweed, Swansea was called Copperpolis. We stop at a ruin that is overgrown by Japanese knotweed. It's the remainings of an old coal mine. We had the best and the most pure coal in the world, and that attracted the copper smelters. The copper was imported first from Cornwall, Bristol, Devon, and later from Cuba. And with the boats that brought the copper, other unwanted passengers came to Swansea. Jo tells me that in 1886, the yellow fever broke out in Swansea. A copper boat from Cuba that landed on a very hot day launched infectious mosquitoes. They swarmed over the city like zombies, or better said vampires, drinking blood of the local citizens. Next to copper and pests, also people got imported. Most of them came from the north of England, later from other places. We needed workforce to work in the mines. My other half's family owned a coal mine. My other half is sailing now, she says. My other half. I don't really understand what that means. The other half of this woman that is talking about football, zombies and invasion curves is currently at sea, out there, in the gigantic bay of Swansea. Anat Singh asks in her book, The Mushroom at the End of the World, what is growing on the ruins we've created? What manages to live in disrupted landscapes? Joe is pointing now at a stretch of land and tells me that as far as I can see, the soil got poisoned by the copper smelters. Later, when we head back to the city center, I found out that Swansea got also seriously hit by the war. The Germans planned to bomb the harbor, but because of the glass roof, they mistaken the market for the docks. It was a delusional reflection that saved us, says Joe. The Japanese knotweed, as other invasives, likes polluted land, polluted, damaged, rumbled soil. I read an article about this explaining that this is the reason why a lot of military domains get invaded by invasive. The soil gets rumbled by heavy boots that bring seeds and pieces of plants from war zones all over the world. Joe asked me if I read the book The New Wild, under title Why Invasive Species Will Be Nature's Salvation. I did. It's a daring, provocative book. Joe hates it, and she thinks that the writer is a fool. The writer is Fred Pearce. In his former life, a big forefighter of eradication. Pearce traveled the world and reports in his book how invasive species in some cases spread on polluted land, keep the soil somehow fertile and leave then again, giving place to others to come in. That means that all these so-called harmful introduced species may in fact be beneficial in cleaning up degraded or polluted environments. Pearce provides an optimistic outcome to human interference in nature by accepting that invasive species are part of the so-called New Wild. The vagabonds and aliens will be the pioneers and colonists in a constant renewal of nature, he writes. Joe obviously does not share this vision. We park at a local Marks and Spencer. Joe is this kind of woman that parks a car and does not immediately get out. She seems to ponder her mind. This is a good example, she says. The Japanese knotweed likes disturbed soils. So after the copper smelters left and the mines were closed, we needed other things. And Swansea is now becoming a Valhalla for shoppers. We are building a lot of malls, so soil gets disturbed again. She points at a big knotweed bush right next to the parking lot of Marks and Spencer's. I am somehow getting very excited, thinking like, probably it cannot get more English than this. During our lunch, we talk about theater and art, and she advises me to go to a local museum the next day. This is another important fact in the history of Swansea. The Cambrian copperworks closed and reopened as a pottery, another industry that requires a lot of coal. We have beautiful pottery here in Swansea, very artistic, she adds. The next day, I see Japanese landscapes, Asian motifs of the exotic vegetation, Chinese gardens, a peacock, and some English flowers. The catalogue of the museum explains that all this is held together with a fine quality of gilding that Swansea was famous for. Hybridity held by fire. Knotweed attracts litter. Everywhere there's knotweed, there's also garbage and homeless people. We are standing now at the side of a heavy trafficked road. We climb over a low fence and it starts to rain. There was just a homeless guy coming out of that big bush there. Did you see that? And there, you see, somebody put up a tent in that bush near the little pond. That makes my job actually very dangerous. Joe seems to realize this only now. Normally, I only protect myself from starks scratching my retina. She takes some safety goggles out of her backpack and puts them on. She looks now like a lab technician gone wild, and she continues. But how can I defend myself from those guys? Joe, with goggles now, makes a path through the bush. I follow her closely, unprotected. We step on needles lying on the ground, broken glass, used condoms. It's just a mess. Joe sighs. I talked to Joe about different methods of eradication of knotweed. She made me read the Knotweed Way of Conduct. It's a massive document with meticulously developed paths to take in case you discover knotweed on your property. Houses devaluate, and it's hard to get an insurance if you have knotweed on your land. I'm actually on standby 24 on 24. If people sell or buy property, they have to get a knotweed label, and I provide fast and good service. This seems like an advertisement. When Jo started her company, she was planning to put flyers in post boxes all over Swansea. But no need for that. The knotweed seems to be in that way on her side. A lot of money is involved. It's a booming business, Jo laughs. And she feels a bit ashamed of having said this. We are now standing in a zone of very cute little knotweed stalks. Jo explains me that this phenomena is called sublethal bonsai growth. This happens when you spray the knotweed, but you don't spray it enough, so the plant continues to grow, but then in its miniature version. It looks very sweet, but actually it's sick. It's just under that level. Cute little zombies living in a liminal space. I learned on a conference in Zurich that most of the knotweed gets eradicated by spraying the leaves with glyphosate, but the better method seems to be injecting the stalks. This is also what Jo does. On that day, I saw hectares of knotweed, and Jo is planning to inject them all, one by one. At the end of the day, Jo takes me out of this mess, she says, and we drive to the Mumbles, a nature reserve on the edge of the city of Swansea. I sometimes feel like Sherlock Holmes. I come to a patch of land and I try to detect what is going on there. Who is killing who? What is the ecology of that patch? It's an interesting job. I ask her if she considers herself as part of the crime scene, like in a film noir, wherein the detective in the end of the movie finds out he is actually the criminal. She does not really answer my question. She spotted a new batch of knotweed and gets in a mood that is hard to describe, something between excited and angry. We have an ice cream and Joe takes me to my hotel. I was staying in the most messy and dirty hotel I've ever seen. Even the ceiling was dirty. On booking.com they said it was located next to the seaside. Yes, it was. But between the sea and my hotel was a heavy trafficked road. The hotel smelled like pee, and it was full of Eastern European construction workers and girls with super short skirts without panties. It was pretty cold those days in April. I was lying in a dirty bed in the Southview Hotel and I watched the kids program on telly in the middle of the night. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The Teenage Turtles are mutant because they are contaminated by nuclear energy and so they got special powers. A Chernobyl story. It was actually a pretty wild episode wherein the monster of Frankenstein and Dracula were battling each other. And the turtles, they were trying to end the battle. And then, suddenly, out of the blue, a weird creature shows up. The mutant turtles are very happy that finally they got the help from a plant-like critter called Neophyte. According to Wikipedia, a neophyte is a person who has just been baptized or a plant that has just been introduced in a certain area. The sexy neophyte ends the battle and she saved the world. Is Jo watching the same program? Or is she making out with her other half? I ask myself. The next Sunday morning, I got lured into a Baptist church, where the priest was getting wild on the concept of purity. To get purity of mind, you should concentrate on Jesus and the way he led his life. There was a lot of talking about purity in the priest's speeches that Sunday. But the only thing I could think of was that I forgot to ask if Jo was religious, as if this would have made any change in her perception on eradication. I don't think so. Purity of mind, what does that mean in regard to ecology and invasives? Does having a pure mind means not killing any living being, or can purity imply necessary killing to give others more chance to survive? Or does it mean letting nature take its course? Jesus, there's so many possibilities if you start thinking about it. What would the Baptist priest have to say to that? From the church, I decided to go back to the graveyard Jo showed me the day before. You would be interested in this project, she wrote me some months before our actual meeting. We arrived at a graveyard that was just fully blown overrun by Japanese knotweed. Graves and corpses are being uprooted by the rhizomes of the knotweed. And Jo told me there's a famous Welsh bard buried here, but she could not remember his name, and his grave was not to be found, hidden by knotweed. Some years ago, the church decided to sell the cemetery. The knotweed took over and the church lost the battle, so putting the graveyard on the market was the only option. Luckily, Joe told me, a Welsh guy who had a lot of money and a lot of ancestors buried here bought it. He wants to turn it into a place for biodiversity. Oh yeah, I answer ironically, smart move. Biodiversity seems to be a magical word for getting a lot of funding from here and there. I start rambling. But what is biodiversity? The concept seemed to be surrounded by a fuzzy cloud, as if it never left the mists of the rainforest. What do we want to obtain? Is it as much as possible different species on the smallest surface? Are we talking about frequency, variety, or sheer numbers? And then of what? Of processes, ecosystems, species, genes? I continue. Joe seems super disappointed. When I meet people dealing with invasive species, I have to be on guard, actually. I know they are easily offended, and there will always be one moment in the conversation they will firmly state that they are not racists. Just like that, out of the blue. It happened to me several times. I told Joe earlier I'm not against or for eradication. I'm just wondering what the options are. And during those conversations, I try to sense how far I can go with my questioning. Mostly, it's pretty far. And I have the impression I always stay too polite. Well, I am naturally polite. So the guy wants to make a biodiversity project out of this place, and the only minus point is that he is living in Hong Kong. Joe smiles. So that means that I'm basically doing the job on my own, with the help of some volunteers. But, she says, it's a great way of getting people aware of ecology and biodiversity. The first step we have to take, of course, is to get rid of the knotweed. Jo texts her other half that she will be home soon. Her other half texts back that he is surprised that she stayed away such a long time. What he really is surprised about, Jo tells me, is that there is other people as passionate about Japanese knotweed as she is. He couldn't care less. Alone on the graveyard, in pouring rain, in my imagination, I see parts of corpses sticking out of the soil. Phantom dogs. I hear the hush-hush of homeless guys that want to attack me. I hear people making love with already used condoms, and I stand in awe for the immense power of the knotweed. When you're alone in a knotweed bush, more than being confronted by the fear of ending up raped or mugged, I fear and awe the impressive, blind logic, the deaf, directionless growing of the knotweed, the program that seems to be carried out. It frightens me. I think that maybe I could talk my way out of some strange encounter with a person, try some logic. I know this does not work every time, but at least there's a fake feeling of common ground. But against a plant that is crawling slowly, dragging me into the mud with its slimy roots, I feel totally helpless. The horror. I think of the words of the Baptist church priest, Concentrate on God to obtain purity of the heart. Before leaving the capital of the Japanese knotweed, I get a cheap breakfast in an Italian coffee bar at the opposite side of the station. A black man walks to the counter. He walks very, very, very slow. It seems like a ritual, but I'm sure it's not. I think he has just too much time on his hands, so he does things slow. He lives on the street. I saw him yesterday spaced out on some drug wrapped in a carpet. Rudy! Somebody screams at the moment he walks out of the door. People are sitting against the backdrop of the skyline of New York, the New World, having cheap breakfast and discussing the price of beer. 2.3 pounds for a bottle of beer. Can you believe that?